I'm Janelle Park, 54, and for 30 years I poured my heart into building Park's Kitchen, from a single food truck into the most beloved Korean restaurant in our neighborhood. When my son David turned 30, I thought I was giving him the greatest gift, signing over my life's work so he could carry on our family legacy. 3 weeks later, he fired me, said I was holding back progress and my old-fashioned ways didn't fit his vision. The betrayal cut deeper than any knife I'd ever wielded in my kitchen. But David had no idea about the secret recipes I'd never written down, the loyal suppliers who'd become family, or the quiet power I'd built over 3 decades of feeding this community. What happened next would teach him that you can't just erase the woman who built an empire, especially when she still holds all the ingredients for justice. Before we jump back in, tell me where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you trusted most, like this video. The original food truck menu still hangs in my kitchen at home, yellowed and stained with 30 years of memories. I wrote it in both Korean and English, with my careful handwriting, prices in pencil, so I could adjust them when times got tough. Back then, everything was tough. I arrived in America at 24 with my husband Jin, carrying nothing but hope, and my grandmother's recipe for kimchi. We shared a studio apartment with another Korean couple, sleeping on a mattress on the floor, dreaming of something better. Jin worked construction during the day while I cleaned office buildings at night. We saved every penny, counting our money on the kitchen table each week like it was a sacred ritual. The food truck was Jin's idea. Americans love convenience, he'd say in his broken English, gesturing excitedly with his calloused hands. We give them taste of home, their new home. He found the beaten-up truck at an auction, silver paint peeling like old skin. We spent 3 months fixing it up, Jin handling the mechanical work while I scrubbed every surface until it gleamed. Our first day, we parked outside the construction site where Jin used to work. I was terrified, my hands shaking as I fired up the tiny grill. The smells that emerged: garlic, sesame oil, gochujang drew curious workers like a magnet. The first customer was a burly man named Mike, who pointed at the bulgogi and held up 2 fingers. He took one bite and his eyes widened. "Lady, this is incredible," he said, sauce dripping down his chin. That's when I knew we'd found our calling. David was born 2 years later, and he grew up in that truck. As a toddler, he'd nap in a car seat beside the prep station. By age 5, he was handing out napkins and saying thank you in both Korean and English. Customers adored him, this little boy who could count change and remembered their usual orders. "Mama, why do you work so hard?" he'd ask, watching me prep vegetables at dawn. "For you, baby," I'd tell him, ruffling his hair. "For your future." Jin and I dreamed of opening a real restaurant, somewhere David could be proud to bring his friends. We'd drive through neighborhoods, pointing at empty storefronts, imagining Park's Kitchen with proper tables and chairs, a real kitchen, maybe even a small stage for traditional music. Those were golden years, when our biggest worry was running out of rice during the lunch rush. David would do his homework in the truck's passenger seat, the scratching of his pencil mixing with the sizzle of the grill. Regular customers became family: Mrs. Chen, who taught David Mandarin phrases; Officer Rodriguez, who made sure we always had a safe parking spot; the group of college students who pooled their money every Friday for our combination platters. I still remember the day David, maybe 8 years old, stood on a milk crate to reach the grill. "Mama, teach me to cook like you," he said with such seriousness. I guided his small hands, showing him how to test the oil temperature, how to know when the meat was perfectly caramelized. He was a natural, understanding intuitively how flavors worked together. "One day, this will all be yours," I whispered, watching him flip vegetables with surprising skill. "Our family recipe, our American dream." He beamed up at me, sauce smudged on his cheek. "I'll make you proud, Mama." Those words echo in my mind now, bitter as oversteeped tea. The first restaurant lease is framed in my bedroom closet now, hidden behind winter coats like a shameful secret. I can still feel the weight of that pen in my trembling hand, the magnitude of what I was promising. $1,200 a month for a narrow space on 5th Street, between a laundromat and a pawn shop. To me, it might as well have been a palace. Jin and I had saved for 8 years. Every dollar accounted for in my careful ledger. The truck was profitable, but we wanted more. We wanted permanence, respectability, a place where David could invite his high school friends without embarrassment. The building inspector called our space marginal, but I saw possibility in those cracked walls and outdated electrical outlets. Are you certain about this location? The landlord asked, his doubt obvious. This neighborhood is changing, and Korean food is still pretty exotic for most people here. I signed anyway, my signature shaky but determined. This was our shot. The renovation took 6 months and every penny we'd saved. Jin installed the kitchen equipment himself, working until midnight most nights. I painted the walls a warm golden color, hung traditional Korean artwork, and placed a small shrine in the corner, for good luck. The tables were second-hand, the chairs mismatched, but everything was spotless. Opening day, I stood outside at 5 a.m., watching the sun rise over our little restaurant. The sign Park's Kitchen, authentic Korean cuisine, caught the morning light like a promise. David, now 15, stood beside me in his school uniform, proud but nervous. What if nobody comes? He asked. They'll come, I said, though my heart was hammering. Good food calls to people. The first customer was Mrs. Patterson from the flower shop next door. She ordered tentatively, clearly unfamiliar with Korean cuisine. I brought her a small sampler plate bibimbap, kimchi, bulgogi, and waited anxiously as she tasted each dish. Her face transformed with the first bite. My goodness, she breathed. This is extraordinary. Words spread slowly at first. The lunch crowd from nearby offices discovered us, drawn by the generous portions and reasonable prices. I learned their names, their preferences, their stories. Mr. Hassan from the insurance office liked extra rice. Sarah from the law firm was vegetarian, so I created special tofu dishes just for her. The construction crew from the apartment complex down the street came every Thursday, loud and boisterous, but they always left generous tips. Not everyone was welcoming. Some people walked past our door with suspicious glances, muttering about foreign food and those people. A food critic from the local paper wrote a dismissive review, calling our dishes authentic but inaccessible to American palates. I cried reading it, but Jin crumpled the newspaper and threw it away. Her palate is broken, he declared. Not our food. David was different in the restaurant than he'd been in the truck. Taller now, more self-conscious. He helped after school but seemed eager to finish his duties and leave. His friends rarely came by, and when they did, he appeared embarrassed by the Korean pop music I played. The shrine in the corner, the way I bowed slightly when greeting customers. Mom, you don't have to be so traditional, he said one evening, watching me arrange fresh flowers at the shrine. This is America. His words stung, but I understood. He was navigating to world's Korean at home, American everywhere else. I was asking him to straddle both, and that's not easy for any teenager. The first year was brutal. We barely broke even, and I wondered if we'd made a terrible mistake. But slowly, steadily, we built our reputation. The lunch crowd grew larger. Dinner customers started arriving. Weekend reservations became necessary. I hired my first employee, a young Korean woman named Suki who spoke perfect English and helped bridge the cultural gaps I sometimes couldn't cross. By the second year, we were profitable. By the third, we were thriving. The neighborhood around us was changing, 2 new shops opening, young families moving in, the area becoming more diverse and welcoming. Park's Kitchen was no longer the strange foreign restaurant on 5th Street. We were part of the community's fabric, woven into the daily lives of our neighbors. I remember the day David brought his girlfriend to the restaurant for the first time. He was 17, trying to act sophisticated, but I caught him stealing glances at my face, gauging my reaction to this pretty blonde girl who gamely attempted to use chopsticks. When she complimented the kimchi, actually complimented it, not just politely tolerated it. David's relief was palpable. Your mom is amazing, she told him, and I saw something shift in his expression. Pride, maybe, or recognition. That night, as I cleaned the kitchen and prepared for the next day, I felt something I hadn't experienced since arriving in America. Sense of belonging, of having created something lasting and meaningful. The restaurant was more than a business. It was our American dream made manifest, a bridge between the world I'd left behind and the future I was building for my son. My secret recipe book sits in my kitchen drawer at home, pages soft as tissue paper from years of careful handling. The recipes are written in Korean, in my mother's careful script that I copied before leaving Seoul. Some ingredients don't translate directly, the Korean words for certain spices, the measurements that depend on seasons and moods rather than precise. calculations. David never learned to read Korean fluently, and I never wrote these recipes in English. They were my mother's gift to me, and I guarded them like precious jewels. Park's Kitchen flourished over the next 20 years, becoming more than just a restaurant. It became a neighborhood institution. Food writers discovered us, writing glowing reviews that brought customers from across the city. The mayor ate here during his re-election campaign. A Korean soap opera star visited once, and I nearly fainted serving her my grandmother's kimchi jjigae. But success brought its own challenges. David was growing up, and the restaurant that had once been our shared adventure began to feel like a burden to him. High school friends didn't understand why he spent his evenings folding dumplings instead of playing video games. College applications asked about extracurricular activities. And working in family restaurant didn't sound as impressive as student council president or varsity soccer. "I want to study business," he announced during his senior year. Over dinner at our usual table in the restaurant's back corner. "Maybe get an MBA eventually." I felt a flutter of pride, mixed with worry. "Business is good," I said carefully. "But this business, our business, it's different. It's about heart, about family, about feeding people's souls." He looked around the restaurant with what I now recognize as critical eyes. "Mom, you could be making so much more money. The profit margins on Korean food are incredible, but you're not maximizing efficiency. And the decor, it's pretty dated. You could modernize, maybe add some fusion elements to appeal to younger demographics." The words felt foreign in his mouth, like he was reciting from a textbook. I nodded and smiled, but inside I was mourning the little boy who used to stand on a milk crate to help me cook. Jin died David's sophomore year of collegiate. Massive heart attack at 58, sudden and devastating. The funeral was held at the restaurant, which seemed fitting. Jin had poured his life into this place, and it felt right to honor him, surrounded by the smells and sounds he'd loved. David flew home, somber in his black suit, suddenly looking older than his 20 years. "I can take a leave of absence," he offered. "Help you run things." I shook my head. "Your father wanted you to get your education. I can manage." And I did manage, though those first months without Jin were brutal. I worked 18-hour days, handling everything from ordering supplies to balancing the books. The restaurant was my anchor, the routine keeping me functional when grief threatened to overwhelm me. Regular customers became family, checking on me, offering help, sharing their own stories of loss and survival. Mrs. Chen, now in her 80s, would arrive every Tuesday with her grandson, insisting on helping me fold dumplings. "Idle hands make sad hearts," she'd say in her broken English, her fingers still nimble despite her age. Officer Rodriguez, now a sergeant, made sure I got home safely after late nights. The construction crew from the apartment complex, many of them fathers themselves, became unofficial protectors, their presence a comforting constant. I hired more staff. Maria, a young Salvadoran woman, who reminded me of myself at that age. Eager and hardworking James, a culinary school graduate who wanted to learn authentic Korean techniques. Mrs. Kim, a widow who needed purpose as much as income. We became a family of sorts, united by our shared commitment to hospitality and excellence. The restaurant's reputation continued to grow. We were featured in the newspaper's Best of Edition 3 years running. A food blogger with a massive following wrote a piece about us titled "The Soul of Fifth Street." Cooking magazines called, asking for recipes, but I politely declined. Some secrets are meant to be kept in the family. David visited during school breaks, and I watched him observe our operation with increasingly analytical eyes. He'd suggest improvements, point-of-sale systems, social media marketing, cost-cutting measures. Some of his ideas were good, and I implemented them carefully, but others felt like they would change the essential character of what we'd built. "You're sitting on a goldmine, Mom," he said during his junior year, scrolling through his phone while I prepped vegetables. "Korean food is having a moment. K-pop, Korean dramas, Korean beauty products, everything Korean is trendy right now. You could franchise this, maybe open locations in other cities." I paused in my chopping, considering his words. Success was appealing, but success at what cost? "This restaurant is not about trends," I said finally. "It's about tradition, about serving our community. Some things are more important than money." He looked at me with frustration I'd seen before, the same expression he'd worn as a teenager when I insisted on maintaining our small shrine or playing Korean music during dinner service. "You're thinking too small, Mom. Dad would have wanted you to grow, to take advantage of opportunities." The invocation of his father's memory stung, but I held my tongue. David was young, ambitious, full of business school theories. He would learn, I told myself. When he was ready to take over, he would understand that our strength came not from expansion but from roots, not from efficiency but from love. The restaurant was profitable, more profitable than David realized. I had savings, investments, property. I owned the building now, having purchased it from my landlord 5 years earlier. Park's Kitchen was more than a business, it was a legacy, a testament to what an immigrant family could build through hard work and dedication. But as David's graduation approached, I sensed a distance growing between us. His phone calls became shorter, more focused on his job interviews and career prospects. When he talked about the restaurant, it was with the detached interest of an outside observer rather than the passion of someone who'd grown up within its walls. I told myself it was normal. He was launching his own life, finding his own path. But deep in my heart, I wondered if I was losing not just my son, but my successor, the person I'd always imagined would carry our family's legacy forward into the next generation. David's business plan arrived via email on a Tuesday morning, a 40-page document with charts and graphs that made my head spin. The subject line read, Park's Kitchen Modernization Strategy, Confidential. I printed it out and read it over my morning coffee, my stomach growing heavier with each page. Executive Summary: Park's Kitchen represents a significant untapped opportunity in the rapidly expanding Korean food market. Current operations reflect outdated business practices that limit growth potential and profitability. This comprehensive modernization plan outlines strategic improvements to maximize revenue, streamline operations, and position the restaurant for expansion in the competitive casual dining sector. The language was cold, clinical, like he was describing a failing corporation rather than the restaurant that had funded his education and raised him. I kept reading, growing more disturbed with each recommendation. Update interior design to reflect contemporary aesthetic preferences, eliminating dated cultural elements that may alienate non-Korean customers. He wanted to remove the traditional artwork, the shrine, the Korean music that had always been part of our identity, implement dynamic pricing strategies, and reduce portion sizes to industry standards. Charge more, serve less, the opposite of everything I'd built my reputation on. Streamline menu offerings, focusing on popular items with highest profit margins. Consider fusion elements to broaden appeal. Translation: get rid of the traditional dishes that required special ingredients or techniques, the ones that connected us to our heritage. David called that evening, his voice bright with excitement. Did you read it, Mom? I've been working on this 4 months, researching industry trends, analyzing our competition. I think we could double our profits within 2 years. I stared at the printed pages spread across my kitchen table. It's very thorough, I said carefully. I know some of the changes might seem drastic, but the restaurant business is evolving. Customers today want Instagram-worthy experiences, not just good food. We need to adapt or risk becoming irrelevant. Irrelevant. The word sat bitter on my tongue. David, our customers don't come here for Instagram photos. They come for authentic food, for consistency, for consistency. I know, but tradition doesn't pay the bills, Mom. Well, it does, but not as efficiently as it could. Look at page 12. I've calculated the ROI on every major renovation. The payback period is less than 18 months. I found page 12, with its neat columns of numbers that reduced my life's work to profit margins and efficiency metrics. And the staff? I asked. Mrs. Kim has been with us for 15 years. Maria just bought a house. James is saving for his wedding. We'd handle the transition sensitively, of course, but we need to optimize our labor costs. Some positions could be eliminated through automation, others through cross-training. My heart sank. This wasn't the David I'd raised, the boy who'd grown up watching me treat every employee like family. This was a stranger speaking in corporate jargon, viewing people as line items on a spreadsheet. I want to discuss this in person, I said. Can you come home this weekend? Actually, Mom, I was hoping you'd come to me. I've got some investors. I'd like you to meet people who are interested in backing an expansion. They want to see the numbers, understand the growth potential. Investors, the word made my blood cold. I don't want investors, David. This is our family business, but it could be so much more. Mom, you're thinking too small. Korean food is having a moment. Look at the success of places like Kogi BBQ, Jangsu Jang, All the Korean fusion restaurants opening in major cities. We're sitting on a gold mine, but we're treating it like a neighborhood diner. I closed my eyes, trying to reconcile this ambitious stranger with the little boy who used to help me fold dumplings. Success isn't just about money, David. It's about community, about serving people, about honoring where we came from. I'm not dishonoring anything, Mom. I'm trying to build on what you created. But if we don't evolve, we'll stagnate. And stagnation is death in the restaurant business. After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen for a long time, staring at his business plan. Part of me recognized the validity of some of his suggestions, point-of-sale system we'd discussed, the social media presence I'd been reluctant to embrace, but the overall vision felt like erasure, like he wanted to strip away everything that made Park's Kitchen special in pursuit of generic success. I thought about Jin, wondered what he would say. He'd been practical, always focused on providing for our family, but he'd also understood that some things couldn't be measured in dollars and cents. The relationships we'd built, the trust we'd earned, the sense of belonging we'd created, these were our true assets. The next morning, I called my lawyer. If David was serious about taking over the restaurant, we needed to discuss the transition properly. I wasn't ready to retire, but I was 53 and tired in ways I'd never expected. The daily grind of running a restaurant was wearing on me. And I'd been dreaming of sleeping past 5 a.m., of traveling to Korea to visit my aging mother. Maybe David was right about evolution. Maybe I was holding on to the past too tightly, afraid to embrace change. He was educated, ambitious, full of ideas I'd never considered. Perhaps it was time to trust him with the legacy I'd worked so hard to build. But as I reviewed his plan one more time, I couldn't shake the feeling that his vision and mine were fundamentally incompatible. He saw a business to be optimized. I saw a living, breathing extension of our family's story. The question was whether we could find a middle ground, or if passing the torch would mean watching everything I'd built burn down and be replaced by something unrecognizable. The restaurant deed sat in my safe, waiting for the day I'd transfer ownership to my son. I'd always imagined that day would be joyful, a celebration of family legacy and continuity. Now I wondered if it would be the beginning of the end of everything I'd held dear. The signed deed of transfer sits in my jewelry box now, folded carefully, next to my wedding ring and the gold bracelet my mother gave me before I left Korea. That document represents the moment I handed over my life's work, believing I was ensuring our family's future. Instead, I was signing my own dismissal. The ceremony took place on a Sunday evening in the restaurant after we'd closed to regular customers. David insisted on making it formal, professional, though I would have preferred something quieter, more intimate. He brought his lawyer, a sharp-dressed woman who spoke in legal terminology that made my head spin. I brought Mrs. Kim and Maria, the two employees who felt most like family. The restaurant looked beautiful that night. I'd spent the afternoon arranging fresh flowers, polishing every surface until it gleamed. The traditional Korean music played softly in the background, and the aroma of bulgogi still lingered from the dinner service. This was my domain, my creation, and I wanted it perfect for what I believed would be a celebration. "This is a significant moment," David said, standing behind the podium he'd set up near the front window. He wore his best suit, the one he'd bought for job interviews, and spoke with the confidence of someone addressing a board meeting rather than his mother and a handful of longtime employees. Park's Kitchen has been more than a business for our family. It's been our American dream made real, our contribution to this community, our legacy. He paused, looking at me with what I hoped was genuine emotion. "Mom, you built something extraordinary here. Tonight, I promise to honor that legacy while taking it into the future." I signed the papers with a hand that trembled only slightly, my name looking foreign in the midst of all that legal language. David signed next, his signature bold and confident. The lawyer witnessed, stamped, filed copies in her briefcase with businesslike efficiency. "Congratulations, Mr. Park," she said, shaking David's hand. "You're now the sole owner of Park's Kitchen, including all assets, equipment, recipes, and intellectual property." Intellectual property, my recipes, my techniques, my years of building relationships reduced to legal terminology. After the paperwork was finished, we shared a meal I'd prepared especially for the occasion. All of David's favorites from childhood: galbi with perfect char marks, japchae with vegetables cut to precise specifications, kimchi that had been fermenting for exactly 3 weeks, Mrs. Kim had made her famous hotteok for dessert, the sweet pancakes David used to beg for as a little boy. 2 new beginnings, David toasted, raising his glass of soju, and to honoring the past while embracing the future. We all drank, but the liquor tasted bitter to me. Something felt wrong, though I couldn't articulate what. David seemed celebratory, but relieved, as if he'd completed a difficult business transaction rather than received his family's legacy. "So what happens now?" asked Maria, who'd been unusually quiet all evening. "Well, Mom will continue as head chef and general manager," David said, not looking at me. "We'll work together to implement some improvements, gradually transition some responsibilities." "What kind of improvements?" Mrs. Kim asked, her English still accented after 20 years in America. David launched into an abbreviated version of his business plan: modernization, efficiency improvements, menu updates. I watched Mrs. Kim's face fall as he described eliminating redundant positions and streamlining operations. Maria stared at her plate, probably calculating whether her job would survive his optimization efforts. "These changes will take time, of course," David continued. "We want to be respectful of what's been built here while positioning ourselves for growth." I noticed he said ourselves, but looked only at me when discussing the hard work ahead. Only at the lawyer when discussing ownership and profits. The disconnect was subtle but unmistakable. As the evening wound down and people prepared to leave, David pulled me aside. "Mom, I know this feels strange, but you made the right decision. I'm going to make you proud." I hugged him, breathing in the familiar scent of his cologne mixed with the kitchen smells that permeated everything in the restaurant. "You already make me proud," I said. "Just remember what this place means to people. It's not just a business." "I know, Mom, I know." But even as he said the words, I caught him glancing at his phone, checking messages, his attention already moving to whatever came next. The restaurant that had been the center of our family's universe for 30 years was now just one item on his busy schedule. After everyone left, I stayed behind to clean up, as was my habit. David offered to help, but I waved him away. This ritual of closing down, preparing for tomorrow, had always been my meditation time. Tonight, it felt like a farewell. I moved through the familiar routines, wiping down counters, checking that all burners were off, counting the register, updating inventory lists. Every action was muscle memory, performed thousands of times over the decades. But tonight, each task felt different, tinged with uncertainty. The restaurant was mine for 30 years. Now it belonged to David, and I was an employee in the business I'd built from nothing. The transition was supposed to be gradual, collaborative, but I already sensed that David's patience with my old-fashioned methods would be limited. As I locked the door and walked to my car, I turned back for one last look at Park's kitchen. The sign glowed softly in the darkness, the windows reflecting the streetlights like watchful eyes. This place had been my sanctuary, my identity, my life's work. I'd handed it over believing I was ensuring its future. I had no idea I'd just signed my own termination papers. The new staff manual arrived in my mailbox 3 days after the ownership transfer. A thick booklet with Park's Kitchen Employee Handbook, revised edition printed on generic office paper. I read it over my morning coffee, my heart sinking with each page. Where our old informal policies had emphasized family atmosphere and mutual respect, this document read like something from a corporate chain restaurant. Employees are expected to maintain professional demeanor at all times. Personal conversations during service hours are prohibited. Uniform violations will result in written warnings. David had replaced our simple guidelines: treat customers like family, help each other, take pride in our food, with rigid rules that sucked the warmth out of everything we'd built. I arrived at the restaurant that Monday to find David already there, supervising the installation of new terminals. The computers looked aggressively modern against our warm wooden counters, their blue screens harsh and impersonal. "Good morning, Mom," he said, barely looking up from the instruction manual. "The tech guy will be here until noon, setting up the system. I need you to review the new menu with I've made some adjustments." The new menu made my stomach clench. Gone were the traditional Korean names for dishes, replaced with generic descriptions. Korean BBQ beef bowl instead of bulgogi, spicy fermented cabbage instead of kimchi. Prices had increased across the board, not dramatically, but enough that I knew our regular customers would notice. David, Mrs. Chen orders the same thing every Tuesday number for bulgogi with extra rice. She's 85 years old. How is she supposed to navigate this? She adapts, he said, marking something on his clipboard. And if she has questions, the staff can help her. That's what customer service is for. Customer service. As if Mrs. Chen was just another transaction instead of a woman who'd been part of our restaurant family for 2 decades. The changes came rapidly after that. David removed the traditional Korean artwork from the walls, replacing it with modern prints that could have come from any upscale casual dining restaurant. The shrine in the corner, my small altar, honoring our ancestors and asking for continued prosperity, disappeared overnight. When I asked about it, David said it made some customers uncomfortable. It's been there for 28 years. I protested. It's part of who we are. Who we were, Mom. We're evolving. The Korean music stopped too, replaced by generic instrumental background music that David had purchased from some corporate licensing service. The first day without the familiar melodies, I felt like I was working in someone else's restaurant. Most painful was watching the effect on our longtime staff. Mrs. Kim, who'd been with us for 15 years, struggled with the new computer system. Her English was good enough for talking with customers and taking orders, but navigating the touchscreen interface left her frustrated and embarrassed. I don't understand why my old way not good enough, she confided to me during a slow afternoon. I never make mistake with orders before. Maria adapted better to the technology, but she hated the new uniform requirements. David had ordered polo shirts in corporate blue, insisting they looked more professional than the comfortable aprons we'd always worn. The shirts were synthetic, hot under the kitchen lights, and they made our warm, family-style service feel cold and impersonal. I feel like I'm working at Applebee's, Maria muttered, tugging at her collar. What's wrong with looking like we actually cooked the food? James, our young chef who'd joined us straight from culinary school, was perhaps the most affected by David's changes. He'd come to us because he wanted to learn authentic Korean techniques, to understand the stories behind traditional recipes. Now David was pushing him to develop fusion dishes that would appeal to Instagram users. He wants me to make Korean tacos, James told me privately, his voice heavy with disappointment. Korean tacos, Mom, like we're some kind of food truck, trying to follow trends instead of honoring tradition. The customer complaints started within the first week. Mr. Hassan from the insurance office couldn't find his usual lunch special on the new menu. The construction crew grumbled about the increased prices and smaller portions. Sarah from the law firm, now a partner after 15 years, asked why we'd stopped playing Korean music. It feels different in here, she said, looking around the newly sterile dining room. Less like Park's kitchen. I tried to explain the changes diplomatically, but inside I was screaming. This wasn't evolution, it was erasure. David was systematically removing everything that made our restaurant special, unique, ours. In pursuit of broader appeal, he was alienating the community that had supported us for 3 decades. The breaking point came during our busiest lunch rush on Friday. Mrs. Chen arrived for her usual Tuesday visit, confused because she'd gotten the days mixed up. The new hostess, a young woman David had hired to upgrade our front-of-house presentation, didn't recognize her. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but we don't have a table available right now. It's about a 20-minute wait." I watched from the kitchen as Mrs. Chen stood uncertainly by the door, clearly overwhelmed by the changes. For 20 years, we'd always found a spot for her, even if it meant setting up a small table in the corner. She was family. I started to leave the kitchen to greet her personally, but David intercepted me. "Mom, I need you to stay focused on food prep. We're behind on orders, and I can't have the kitchen chef working the front of house." Kitchen chef, the title felt foreign, dismissive. "David, that's Mrs. Chen. She's been coming here since. I know who she is. But we can't make exceptions for every regular customer. It sets a precedent that undermines our efficiency." I watched through the service window as Mrs. Chen waited in line like a stranger, looking small and lost in the restaurant that had been her second home. When she finally ordered, she stumbled over the new menu descriptions, asking the hostess to explain what Korean barbecue beef bowl meant. That night, after service ended, I found myself crying in the walk-in cooler, surrounded by the ingredients that still smelled like home, even though everything else felt foreign. David had been right about one thing: the restaurant was evolving, but it was evolving into something I no longer recognized, something that felt like a betrayal of everything Jin and I had built. 3 weeks of ownership, and my son had already begun erasing our family's legacy, one corporate policy at a time. The termination letter sits in my kitchen drawer now, next to the divorce papers I never had to use and the immigration documents that started our American dream. The corporate letterhead reads Park's Kitchen LLC in sterile font, nothing like the warm, hand-drawn logo Jen and I had designed 30 years ago. "Dear Miss Park," it began, as if I were a stranger rather than the woman who'd built the business from nothing. "Due to organizational restructuring and operational efficiency requirements, your position as head chef and general manager will be terminated effective immediately. Your final compensation, including accrued vacation time, has been calculated and will be deposited into your account within 5 business days." I read it 3 times that Thursday morning, standing in my kitchen at 5 a.m., still wearing the clothes I'd laid out to go to work. The words didn't make sense. How could I be fired from my own restaurant? How could David reduce 30 years of my life to organizational restructuring? The call came at 5:30, just as I was getting into my car to drive to Park's Kitchen for the morning prep I'd done every day since we opened. "Mom, I need you to come to the restaurant, but not to work. We need to talk." His voice was different, formal, distant, like he was reading from a script. This wasn't my son speaking. This was the businessman he'd transformed into, cold and calculating. I drove through empty streets, my hands trembling on the steering wheel. The restaurant looked normal from the outside, our sign still glowing softly, the windows reflecting the early morning sky. But when I tried to use my key, it didn't work. David had changed the locks. He met me at the door, flanked by a security guard I didn't recognize and the same sharp-dressed lawyer who'd witnessed the ownership transfer. The symbolism was was no longer welcome in the space I'd created. "Mom, please sit down," David said, gesturing to a table near the window, the same table where we'd shared meals as a family, where I'd taught him to fold dumplings, where I'd dreamed of handing over a thriving business to my beloved son. "I don't understand," I said, though part of me was beginning to grasp the magnitude of his betrayal. "What is this about?" "I've made the difficult decision to restructure our operations," he said, avoiding my eyes. "The restaurant needs to move in a new direction, and that requires different management approaches. Your methods, while admirable, are no longer compatible with our growth objectives." Growth objectives, management approaches. He was speaking to me like a corporate consultant addressing a failing client, not like a son talking to his mother. "David, I built this restaurant. I know every customer, every supplier, every recipe." "You can't just actually." "I can," he interrupted. And for the first time since he'd arrived, his voice carried a hint of emotion, impatience, maybe even anger. "I'm the owner now. The business decisions are mine to make." The lawyer slid a document across the tabula non-compete agreement that would prevent me from opening another Korean restaurant within a 50-mile radius for 5 years. The terms were devastating, clearly designed to ensure I couldn't rebuild what I'd lost. "You're asking me to sign away my ability to make a living," I said, scanning the legal language that felt like chains around my future. "I'm protecting the business we both care about," David replied. "Competition from someone with your knowledge and reputation would be problematic." Problematic. My own son saw me as a threat to be neutralized rather than a resource to be valued. "Why?" The question came out as a whisper. "Why are you doing this to me?" For the first time, David's corporate mask slipped, and I saw something that might have been guilt flicker across his face. "Because you can't let go, Mom. Every suggestion I make, you resist. Every change I try to implement, you undermine. You say you want me to take over, but you won't actually let me lead." I was trying to preserve what makes us special, what makes us limited. His voice rose, and the real anger came through. "Your traditional methods are holding us back. The shrine, the Korean music, the old-fashioned service style, it all makes customers feel like outsiders if they're not Korean. We could be making 3 times what we're making now if you'd just trust my vision. And the staff, Mrs. Kim, Maria, James, what happens to them? That's not your concern anymore." The coldness in his voice made my blood freeze. "I'll make staffing decisions based on business needs, not sentimental attachments." I stood up slowly, my legs unsteady. The security guard stepped forward slightly, as if I might cause a scene, but I just picked up my purse and looked around the restaurant one last time. The walls where our family photos had hung were bare now. The corner where my shrine had honored our ancestors was empty. Even the familiar smells were different. David had switched to cheaper oil, industrial-grade ingredients that saved money, but sacrificed flavor. I gave you everything, I said quietly. This restaurant, my recipes, my life's work, I handed it all to you because I believed you would honor it. I'm making it better, Mom, more profitable, more efficient, more sustainable. In 5 years, you'll thank me. I walked toward the door, each step feeling like I was leaving pieces of my heart behind. At the threshold, I turned back to look at my son, this stranger in an expensive suit who'd systematically destroyed everything I'd built. Your father would be ashamed, I said. I saw the words hit him like a physical blow, saw his composure crack for just a moment, but he recovered quickly, his face hardening into the impassive mask he'd worn throughout this brutal meeting. My father would understand business necessity, he replied. The security guard walked me to my car, making sure I left the premises without incident. As I drove away, I caught a glimpse of David in the rearview mirror, standing in the doorway of the restaurant we'd built together, watching me disappear from his life as efficiently as he'd erased me from his business. The betrayal was complete. My son had taken everything I'd given him and used it to destroy not just my livelihood, but my identity. I was no longer the chef, no longer the owner, no longer the heart of Park's kitchen. I was just another discarded employee, dismissed and forgotten, prohibited even from competing with the empire I'd created. But as I drove home through the streets I'd traveled every morning for 30 years, a different emotion began to compete with my heartbreak. Beneath the devastation, beneath the shock and pain, something harder was crystallizing. David had made a crucial mistake. He thought ownership meant power, that control meant victory. But he'd forgotten the most important lesson I'd tried to teach him. A restaurant isn't just a business, it's a community, a family, a living thing built on relationships and trust. And those relationships with customers, suppliers, staff, neighbors belonged to me, not to the deed in his safe. The customer complaint letters arrived within the first week, a steady stream of disappointment that filled my mailbox like evidence of David's failures. Mrs. Chen's was the first, written in her careful handwriting on floral stationery. Dear Mrs. Park, she wrote, I went to restaurant Tuesday but everything different. The young girl not know my order. Food, taste, not same. No Korean music make me sad. Where are you? I hope you are okay. Restaurant feel empty without you. I cried reading it, sitting at my kitchen table in the pajamas I'd been wearing for 3 days straight. Since the firing, I hadn't been able to motivate myself to get dressed, to leave the house, to face the world as an unemployed 54-year-old woman whose own son had discarded her. More letters followed. The construction crew wrote a group letter complaining about the increased prices and smaller portions. The food doesn't taste the same, their foreman had scrawled. And where's the lady who always remembered our names? Sarah from the law firm sent an email asking if I was sick, if that's why the service had become so impersonal. Mr. Hassan from the insurance office left a voicemail wondering why his usual lunch special had disappeared from the menu. Each message was a knife twist, confirmation that David was systematically destroying everything I'd built, but they were also something else, proof that what I'd created mattered, that the relationships I'd nurtured over 30 years couldn't be erased by corporate efficiency. My phone rang constantly the first few days. Mrs. Kim called crying, telling me that David had restructured her position from full-time to part-time, cutting her hours and her health benefits. Maria had been written up twice for uniform violations apparently. She'd tied her hair back with a traditional Korean ribbon instead of the regulation scrunchie David had ordered. He makes us punch time clock now, Mrs. Kim sobbed, like we are thieves who steal minutes. Yesterday, I was 2 minutes late from bathroom break, and he gave me warning paper. James called to tell me he was quitting. I can't do it anymore, Mrs. Park. He wants me to use pre-made kimchi from Cisco. Cisco, can you believe it? I told him your kimchi recipe is what makes the jjigae special. And he said consistency and cost control are more important than artisanal ingredients. Pre-made kimchi. The phrase made me physically nauseous. I'd been fermenting my own kimchi for 30 years, adjusting the spice levels seasonally, using techniques my grandmother had taught me. Now David was replacing it with mass-produced garbage that probably contained more preservatives than vegetables. I spent the first week in a haze of depression and disbelief. I'd wake up at 5 a.m. out of habit, my body programmed for 30 years of restaurant prep, only to remember I had nowhere to go. I'd make coffee and sit by my kitchen window, watching the world go about its business while my own life felt suspended in limbo. The second week, I forced myself to venture out. I drove past Park's Kitchen one evening during dinner service, parking across the street like a stalker watching my own life. The restaurant looked busy from the outside, but I could see the differences, even from a distance. The service seemed rushed, impersonal. Customers were eating quickly and leaving, instead of lingering over conversations and second cups of tea. The warm, family atmosphere I'd cultivated was gone, replaced by efficient turnover. I watched David through the window, moving between tables with a tablet in his hand, checking off items like a manager at a chain restaurant. He looked successful, professional, completely in control. But even from across the street, I could see the stress in his posture, the way he kept checking his phone, the sharp gestures he made when speaking to staff. As I sat there in my car, feeling like a ghost, haunting my former life, I realized something important. David wasn't thriving. He was struggling, fighting to maintain control of something that was actively resisting his attempts to change it. The restaurant was a living thing, built on relationships and traditions that couldn't be replaced by corporate policies and efficiency metrics. The third week, Maria called with devastating news. "Mrs. Park, you need to know he's meeting with some business people tomorrow. They look like investors, or maybe buyers." I heard him on the phone talking about monetizing the brand and franchise opportunities. The blood drained from my face. David wasn't just changing the restaurant, he was planning to sell it, to turn Park's Kitchen into some generic Korean food chain. Everything Jin and I had built, everything our family had sacrificed for, would become a corporate commodity. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of my own powerlessness. David owned the restaurant legally, completely. The non-compete agreement I'd been forced to sign prevented me from opening a competing business. Financially, I was comfortable. The sale had left me with enough money to retire, but money couldn't replace identity, purpose, legacy, thought. But as the sleepless hours dragged on, something began to shift in my thinking. Yes, David owned the building, the equipment, the legal rights to the Park's Kitchen name, but did he really own what made the restaurant successful? Did a deed transfer the relationships I'd built, the reputation I'd earned, the trust I'd cultivated over 3 decades? I thought about Mrs. Chun's letter, about the construction crew's complaints, about the staff members who'd called to confide their frustrations. David might have legal ownership, but I still had something more valuable. I had community. I had loyalty. I had the knowledge that came from 30 years of feeding people's bodies and souls. For the first time since the termination, I felt something other than despair. Buried deep beneath the hurt and betrayal, a familiar emotion was stirring, the same determination that had carried me from a failed food truck to a successful restaurant. The same stubborn refusal to quit that had sustained me through death and every other challenge I'd faced. David thought he'd won by taking my restaurant, but he'd made a crucial miscalculation. He'd assumed that success came from ownership, from control, from optimization. He'd forgotten that the restaurant business isn't really about food, it's about people. And the people, customers, suppliers, staff, community, still knew who really understood how to feed their hearts. I got up, made coffee, and sat down at my kitchen table with a notepad. If David wanted to play business games, I could play too. But I wouldn't be playing by his rules. I'd be playing by the rules I'd learned over 30 years of building something from nothing, the rules of relationship, loyalty, and authentic care. The war for Park's Kitchen's soul wasn't over. It was just beginning. The supplier contact list was still in my phone, unchanged, despite everything David had done. 30 years of relationships, 30 years of trust, reduced to names and numbers in my contacts folder. But these weren't just business connections, they were partnerships built on handshakes, respect, and mutual support through good times and bad. I started with Mr. Kim from Seoul Market, our longtime vegetable supplier. His voice brightened immediately when I identified myself. "Mrs. Park, I was hoping you would call. I am very worried about you. Your son, how do I say this politely? He is very different from you." "Different how?" I asked, though I suspected I knew the answer. "He wants to renegotiate all contracts, asks for cheaper prices, wants me to substitute inferior products. Yesterday he asked if I could supply Chinese cabbage instead of Napa for kimchi." Chinese cabbage? I told him no, absolutely not. But he said I was being inflexible about vendor relationships. Chinese cabbage for kimchi. The suggestion was so fundamentally wrong, so ignorant of what made authentic Korean cuisine special, that I felt physically ill. It would be like substituting ketchup for gochujang. Technically both are red condiments, but the comparison ended there. Mr. Kim, has he signed new contracts with you yet? No, he keeps delaying, says he's evaluating all vendor relationships for optimization. Mrs. Park, I have been supplying Park's Kitchen for 20 years. My family depends on this account, but I cannot compromise quality just to save a few pennies. After hanging up, I called Mrs. Yoon from Arawang Seafood. Her story was similar. David questioning every purchase, demanding cheaper alternatives, treating long-time partnerships like they were disposable commodities. The woman who'd been providing our fish for 15 years, who knew exactly how I liked my mackerel cleaned and my shrimp sized, was being treated like a replaceable vendor. He asked me to switch to frozen squid. She told me, her voice heavy with disappointment. Frozen? For your ojingyo bukyim that customers love so much. I told him fresh squid is not expensive. But he said frozen is more consistent and cost-effective. Each conversation revealed the same pattern. David was systematically destroying the relationships that had made Park's Kitchen special, prioritizing short-term savings over long-term quality. He was treating the restaurant like a corporate entity that could be optimized through spreadsheets and efficiency metrics, completely missing the human elements that made it successful. But more importantly, I was learning something David didn't realize. His position was far more precarious than he understood. Mrs. Yoon mentioned that he was behind on payments to several suppliers. Mr. Kim revealed that David had been asking about extending credit terms. The produce distributor told me that David had questioned every item on our standing orders, as if he didn't understand what we needed to run the kitchen. Mrs. Park, said Mr. Lee from Hankook Grocery, I must ask, is your son trained in restaurant management? He seems confused about basic operations. Last week he tried to cancel our standing order for sesame oil because he said it was redundant with vegetable oil. I had to explain that Korean cooking requires sesame oil, but he seemed to think all oils are the same. My heart sank at the confirmation of what I'd suspected. David's MBA and business theories hadn't prepared him for the practical realities of running a Korean restaurant. He understood profit margins and cost analysis, but he didn't understand that you can't make kimchi jjigae without properly fermented kimchi, or that the quality of your rice affects every dish you serve. The most revealing call was with Mr. Choi from Han River Imports, who supplied our specialty ingredients, the specific brands of gochujang, doenjang, and other fermented sauces that gave our dishes their authentic flavors. Mrs. Park, I am very concerned. Your son asked me to send him a list of comparable substitutes for all the products we supply. He wants to know if he can buy similar items from mainstream restaurant suppliers at lower prices. I tried to explain that these aren't just ingredients, they're the foundation of Korean flavor, but he said he needs to optimize cost structures for maximum profitability. What did you tell him? I told him the truth. There are no substitutes for authentic Korean ingredients. If you want authentic Korean food, you cannot make real bulgogi marinade with American soy sauce and corn syrup. You cannot create proper kimchi with mass-produced gochujang. But he seemed to think I was trying to inflate prices. After hours of phone calls, a clear picture emerged. David was running the restaurant into the ground through a combination of ignorance and arrogance. He was alienating suppliers, confusing staff, and disappointing customers, all while believing he was improving operations. The irony was devastating. In trying to make the restaurant more profitable, he was destroying everything that made it profitable in the first place. But I was also discovering something else, something that sparked the first real hope I'd felt since the termination. Every supplier I spoke with asked the same question: when are you coming back? They weren't just being polite, they were genuinely concerned about the restaurant's future under David's management. Mrs. Park, Mr. Kim said as our conversation wound down, if you ever decide to open a new restaurant, please call me first. I would be honored to supply vegetables for your kitchen again. Similar offers came from every supplier I contacted. These relationships, built over decades of reliability and mutual respect, belonged to me, not to David. He might own the building and equipment, but I owned something more valuable: the trust and loyalty of the people who made authentic Korean cuisine possible. As evening fell, I sat in my kitchen reviewing the notes I'd taken during these conversations. David's financial situation was worse than I'd imagined. He was stretching payments, seeking cheaper alternatives, and clearly struggling with cash flow. The non-compete agreement he'd forced me to sign suddenly seemed less like a sword hanging over my head and more like evidence of his own insecurity. For the first time since my termination, I smiled. David had made a classic business school mistake. He'd focused on controlling costs while ignoring the factors that generated revenue. He'd assumed that efficiency would translate to profitability, not understanding that in the restaurant business, relationships and quality were the foundations of sustainable success. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts again. But this time, I wasn't looking at suppliers. I was looking at something more powerful: the phone numbers of 30 years' worth of customers, staff members, and community connections. David might have legal ownership of Park's Kitchen, but I had something he couldn't purchase, transfer, or optimize. I had the keys to the kingdom he thought he'd inherited. And tomorrow, I would start using them. The community support petition arrived in my email on a Wednesday morning, forwarded by Mrs. Chen's granddaughter with the subject line, "Justice for Mrs. Park." I opened it with trembling fingers, not sure what to expect. We, the undersigned customers, neighbors, and friends of Park's Kitchen, demand the immediate reinstatement of Mrs. Janelle Park to her rightful position as head chef and manager of the restaurant she built from nothing. Mrs. Park's removal represents not just bad business practice, but a betrayal of the community trust and family values that made Park's Kitchen a neighborhood treasure. The petition had been live for less than 24 hours and already had over 300 signatures. I scrolled through the names, recognizing faces and stories from 30 years of service. Mrs. Chen had signed first, followed by the entire construction crew. Sarah from the law firm had added a comment. Mrs. Park didn't just feed Usashi, created a home away from home. The restaurant hasn't been the same since she left. My phone started ringing as news of the petition spread. The first call was from Maria, who was crying so hard I could barely understand her. "Mrs. Park, I'm so sorry. I had to tell them what happened. I couldn't keep pretending everything was normal when people kept asking where you were. The whole neighborhood knows something's wrong. Maria, you don't need to apologize." "Yes, I do. I should have spoken up sooner. David's been treating us like criminals instead of family. Yesterday he installed security cameras in the kitchen to monitor productivity. He's timing our bathroom breaks." "Mrs. Park, our bathroom breaks." The image of my warm, welcoming kitchen being turned into a surveillance state made my heart ache. This wasn't just about business efficiency, it was about fundamental respect for human dignity. Mrs. Kim called next, her voice shaking with a mixture of anger and determination I'd never heard from her before. "Mrs. Park, I quit today. 35 years I work in restaurants in America, and nobody ever treat me like David treat me. He tell me my English not good enough for customers, that I make restaurant look unprofessional. I tell him I speak better English than he speak Korean, and I quit." More calls followed throughout the day. James had already found a new job at a high-end Korean restaurant downtown, where they were eager to hire someone trained in authentic techniques. 2 of our part-time servers had walked out after David criticized them for spending too much time talking with elderly customers. Even some of our newer staff members, people I barely knew, were reaching out to express their support. "He's completely lost control," one of the line cooks told me. "Yesterday we ran out of kimchi during lunch rush because he ordered the wrong quantities. When customers complained, he blamed the kitchen staff for poor inventory management. But Mrs. Park, you always handled the ordering. None of us know what quantities to request because you took care of all that." The customer complaints were escalating too. The petition was just the formal expression of frustration that had been building for weeks. Mrs. Chen's Tuesday visits had stopped entirely after the hostess treated her dismissively. The construction crew had started bringing bagged lunches instead of eating at Park's Kitchen. Officer Rodriguez, who'd been protecting our restaurant for decades, told Maria he was considering filing a complaint about David's aggressive management style toward longtime employees. But the most devastating call came from an unexpected source: David himself. "Mom, we need to talk. Some customers are spreading lies about me, trying to damage the restaurant's reputation. I need you to help me handle this situation." The audacity took my breath away. "You want my help? After you fired me and banned me from the premises? This is different. This is about protecting the family business. People are posting negative reviews online, organizing boycotts. They're trying to destroy what we've built. What you've built. David, you made it very clear that I had no place in your vision. Look, maybe I was hasty with some of the personnel changes, But you have to understand I'm trying to run a profitable business, not a charity. When I see Mrs. Kim taking 15-minute bathroom breaks or Maria spending 10 minutes chatting with one customer, I have to think about efficiency. Mrs. Kim is 70 years old, David, and Maria builds customer relationships that keep people coming back for decades. That's not inefficiency, that's the foundation of our success. Our success, Mom. The restaurant was barely profitable under your management. I've increased revenue by 12% in just 3 weeks. By raising prices and cutting portions. That's not sustainable growth. It's exploitation of customer loyalty. It's business optimization. But I can't implement improvements when former employees are sabotaging my efforts by spreading rumors and encouraging boycotts. The conversation revealed everything I needed to know about David's state of mind. He genuinely believed he was being victimized by unreasonable customers and disloyal staff. He couldn't see that the sabotage was actually the natural response of a community that felt betrayed and abandoned. After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen reviewing everything I'd learned over the past few days. David's position was far weaker than he realized. His staff was quitting, his customers were angry, his suppliers were concerned, and his reputation in the community was deteriorating rapidly. The petition was just the visible tip of a much larger iceberg of dissatisfaction. More importantly, I was beginning to understand the true extent of my own power. For 30 years, I'd been the heart of Park's Kitchen. The person who connected all the different elements, staff, customers, suppliers, community, into a functioning whole. David had assumed he could replace that connection with corporate policies and efficiency metrics, but he was discovering that restaurants aren't just about food and profit margins. They're about relationships, trust, and community. The petition was still growing, over 500 signatures by evening, with comments that read like love letters to the restaurant I'd built. Mrs. Park always remembered my son's food allergies. When my husband was in the hospital, Mrs. Park sent soup to our house every day. Park's Kitchen was where my family celebrated every milestone for 20 years. These weren't just business relationships, they were bonds of care and mutual support that had been woven into the fabric of our neighborhood. David could change the menu, alter the decor, and restructure the staff, but he couldn't replicate 30 years of genuine human connection. As I prepared for bed that night, I felt something I hadn't experienced since the termination. David had made a crucial error in judgment. He'd assumed that firing me would solve his problems, but instead, he'd created a much bigger problem. He'd turned me from an internal voice of caution into an external symbol of resistance. The community was rallying around me, not because they opposed change, but because they recognized authenticity. They could see the difference between someone who viewed the restaurant as a business opportunity and someone who viewed it as a sacred trust. David thought he'd won when he took legal ownership of Park's Kitchen, but ownership and control were proving to be very different things. And tomorrow, I would begin teaching him that lesson in earnest. The missing spice blend recipe became David's obsession. Though he didn't realize, I knew about his desperate attempts to recreate it. Maria called to tell me he'd spent 3 days in the kitchen trying to duplicate my signature bulgogi marinade, mixing different combinations of soy sauce, garlic, and pear juice like an amateur chef following random internet recipes. He's getting so frustrated. Mrs. Park, yesterday he made 6 different batches, and none of them tasted right. Customers are complaining that the bulgogi doesn't have the same flavor anymore. One regular customer sent her plate back and asked if we changed suppliers. I wasn't surprised. The marinade recipe that made our bulgogi famous wasn't written down anywhere. It lived in my hands, my nose, my instincts honed over 30 years of daily practice. The proportions changed with the seasons, adjusted for the specific cut of meat, modified based on the humidity and temperature in the kitchen. It wasn't just a recipe. It was a relationship between cook and ingredients that couldn't be replicated through measurement and documentation. What did he say when the customer complained? I asked. He told the server to offer a discount and explained that we were refining our recipes for consistency. But Mrs. Park, the customer, has been coming here for 15 years. She knows what our bulgogi should taste like. The calls from former staff painted a picture of escalating chaos in the kitchen. Without my daily oversight, David was discovering that running a Korean restaurant required knowledge he didn't possess. He'd assumed that owning the business meant understanding the business, but every day brought new evidence of his fundamental ignorance. James, who'd already started his new job, called to tell me about David's latest disaster. He tried to make kimchi jjigae using store-bought kimchi, and not even good store-bought, the cheapest stuff from the regular supermarket. It had no depth, no funk, no soul. I watched him taste it, and you could see on his face that he knew it was wrong, but he served it anyway. My heart broke thinking about customers ordering my grandmother's kimchi jjigae recipe and receiving some pale imitation made with mass-produced ingredients. That soup wasn't just food, it was history, tradition, the taste of my childhood in Seoul and my mother's love expressed through fermented vegetables and slow-simmered pork. But the most revealing information came from Mr. Kim at Seoul Market. David had been calling him daily, growing increasingly desperate for help. "Mrs. Park," he asked me to taste his bulgogi marinade yesterday. I tried to be polite, but it was terrible, too salty, wrong balance, missing something essential. When I suggested he ask you for the recipe, he became very angry, said he didn't need help from outdated methods, and that he would figure it out scientifically, as if 30 years of intuitive cooking could be reduced to a laboratory experiment. David was approaching Korean cuisine like it was a manufacturing process that could be optimized and standardized, completely missing the artistry and cultural knowledge that made it authentic. That the suppliers were losing patience with his incompetence. Mrs. Yoon from Arrowrung Seafood told me that David had ordered the wrong type of dried anchovies for soup stock, then blamed her when the broth lacked flavor. Mr. Choi from Han River Imports said David had requested generic Asian seasonings to replace our specific Korean ingredients, apparently believing that all East Asian flavors were interchangeable. He ordered Chinese 5-spice powder, Mr. Choi said, his voice heavy with disbelief. Said it was similar enough to gochugaru for kimchi. I had to explain that 5-spice and Korean chili flakes are completely different, but he accused me of trying to inflate costs with unnecessary specialty items. The financial pressure was mounting too. According to Maria, David had been staying late every night, poring over spreadsheets and making angry phone calls to suppliers about payments. His cost-cutting measures were backfiring spectacularly. The cheaper ingredients produced inferior food, leading to customer complaints and reduced sales. His efficiency improvements had actually made the kitchen less efficient, as inexperienced staff struggled with unfamiliar procedures and recipes. But the most devastating blow came when Mrs. Chen finally returned to the restaurant, accompanied by her granddaughter as a translator and advocate. Maria witnessed the encounter and called me immediately afterward, her voice shaking with emotion. "Mrs. Park, it was heartbreaking." Mrs. Chen ordered her usual kimchi jjigae and brown rice. When the food arrived, she took one spoonful and started crying. Her granddaughter asked what was wrong, and Mrs. Chen said, "This isn't Mrs. Park's soup. This tastes like sadness. Tastes like sadness." The phrase haunted me for days. Mrs. Chen, with her elderly palate, trained by decades of traditional Korean cooking, could taste the absence of love in David's version of my recipes. She could sense that the food was being made by someone who viewed cooking as a chore rather than an act of care. "What did David do?" I asked. He tried to explain that we were using improved recipes with better consistency and cost control. Mrs. Chen's granddaughter translated, and Mrs. Chen just shook her head. She left money on the table for food she barely touched and walked out. David looked confused, like he couldn't understand why a customer would reject better food. Better. David's definition of better was purely economic: cheaper, faster, more standardized. He couldn't comprehend that customers came to Park's Kitchen, not for efficiency but for authenticity, not for consistency but for the irreplaceable flavor of food, made with traditional techniques and genuine care. The online reviews were reflecting this deterioration. Our 5-star rating was dropping rapidly as customers posted complaints about changed recipes, reduced quality, and impersonal service. "This used to be our favorite restaurant," one review read. "But something fundamental has changed. The food tastes mass-produced now, like it's coming from a corporate kitchen instead of a family restaurant." Each negative review was a knife in my heart, but also confirmation that David's approach was fundamentally flawed. He'd assumed he could replicate 30 years of expertise through trial and error. That recipes were just formulas that could be reverse-engineered and improved. But real Korean cooking wasn't just about ingredients and measurements. It was about understanding fermentation, respecting tradition, and cooking with the kind of intuitive knowledge that could only come from years of practice under the guidance of someone who truly understood the cuisine. Dofta owned the restaurant, but he was discovering that ownership without knowledge was worse than useless. It was destructive. Every day he spent trying to recreate my recipes was another day of disappointing customers, frustrating staff, and damaging the reputation it had taken me 30 years to build. And every failed attempt, every customer complaint, every supplier's expression of concern was weakening his position while strengthening mine. The community was beginning to understand that David wasn't just different from me, he was incompetent. And incompetence, unlike ownership, could be challenged. The financial records David had left scattered across his desk told the whole story: declining revenue, increasing costs, mounting debts, and a cash flow crisis that threatened the restaurant's survival. I wasn't supposed to see these documents, but Maria had photographed them during one of her final shifts before quitting. Knowing I needed to understand the true extent of David's failures. The numbers were devastating. In 6 weeks of David's management, Park's Kitchen had lost 30% of its regular customers. Food costs had actually increased despite his cheaper ingredients, because he was ordering wrong quantities and wasting expensive items through inexperience. Labor costs were skyrocketing due to constant staff turnover and the overtime required to train replacements. The restaurant that had been consistently profitable under my management was hemorrhaging money under his. But the most shocking revelation was in his loan applications. David had borrowed against the restaurant's assets to fund his improvements, putting the property itself at risk. The stainless steel equipment, the commercial kitchen, even the building I'd worked so hard to purchase, everything was now collateral for loans he couldn't repay if the business continued failing. I called David on a Thursday evening, after the dinner service, when I knew he'd be alone in the restaurant, probably staring at the same financial documents that had revealed his desperation to Maria. "We need to talk," I said without preamble. "Mom, if this is about the petition or the online reviews, I'm handling it. Every business goes through adjustment periods. This isn't about reviews, David. This is about survival. Your restaurant is failing." The silence that followed told me everything he knew. Despite all his defensive posturing, his corporate speak about efficiency and optimization, he knew that his grand vision was collapsing around him. "I don't know what you mean," he said finally, but his voice lacked conviction. "Meet me at the restaurant tomorrow at 2 p.m., after lunch service, before dinner prep. We're going to have an honest conversation about what happens next." I arrived early, parking across the street and watching the lunch crowd. Or what was left of it. The bustling energy I remembered was gone, replaced by scattered tables of customers who seemed to be eating quickly and leaving. No one lingered over conversation. No one looked relaxed or happy. The restaurant felt like a place people tolerated rather than enjoyed. David let me in through the back entrance, looking older than his 30 years. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his confident demeanor replaced by the exhausted bearing of someone who'd been fighting a losing battle for weeks. "Before you say anything," he began, "I want you to know that I'm implementing new strategies to address some of the operational challenges we've been facing." "David, stop." I pulled out copies of the financial documents Maria had photographed and spread them across the table between us. "I've seen the numbers. I know about the loans, the declining revenue, the staff turnover. Your operational challenges are destroying the restaurant." His face went white as he recognized his own paperwork. "How did you? Those are confidential business documents. Your staff is worried about their jobs, David. They're watching you drive this place into bankruptcy, and they're scared. Maria brought these to me because she cares about Park's Kitchen more than she fears your retaliation." He slumped into a chair, the fight going out of him. For the first time since taking over the restaurant, he looked like my son, instead of a corporate stranger. "I don't understand what's happening," he said quietly. "Everything I learned in business, school, everything that should work, it's all failing here. The efficiency improvements should be increasing profitability. The cost reductions should be improving margins, but customers hate the changes. Staff keeps quitting, and I can't seem to make the food taste right no matter what I do." "David, you're trying to run a Korean restaurant like it's a McDonald's franchise. You can't optimize culture. You can't efficiently a community. You can't cost reduce your way to authenticity." "But the numbers don't lie, Mom. Your methods were leaving money on the table. The profit margins could be so much higher. If what? If you destroy everything that makes customers want to come here. If you turn our family recipes into processed food. If you treat our staff like replaceable machinery." I pulled out another document, the loan paperwork that showed how desperate his financial situation had become. You've borrowed $200,000 against the restaurant in 6 weeks. That's more debt than the business had in 30 years under my management. And the revenue projections you gave the bank, they're pure fantasy. You'll never hit those numbers with the approach you're taking. David stared at the loan documents like they were a cancer diagnosis. I needed capital for the renovations, the new equipment, the marketing campaign. The bank said the improvements would pay for themselves within 2 years. The bank was wrong. Or more accurately, your assumptions were wrong. You assumed you could improve profitability by changing everything that made us profitable in the first place. So what do you want me to do? Admit failure? Give up everything I've worked for? I want you to tell me the truth. About why you really fired me, about what you're trying to prove, about whether you actually care about this restaurant or just see it as a business opportunity. The question hung in the air between us, heavy with 6 weeks of accumulated resentment and disappointment. David was quiet for a long time, staring at his hands. I wanted to prove I could do it better than you, he said finally. I wanted to show that my education, my modern business knowledge, could take what you built and make it truly successful. Not just neighborhood successful, but real success, franchisable success. And now I'm scared I'm going to lose everything. The restaurant, the building, our family's legacy. I'm behind on payments to suppliers. Staff keeps walking out, and I wake up every morning not knowing if this is the day everything falls apart. I looked at my son, really looked at Eman, saw past the corporate facade to the frightened young man underneath. He wasn't evil or malicious. He was just wildly out of his depth, trying to apply theoretical knowledge to a practical situation he didn't understand. David, there's a way to save the restaurant, but it requires admitting that your approach isn't working and accepting help from someone you've spent 6 weeks trying to replace. You want to come back. I want to save what your father and I built. Whether that means coming back, partnering with you, or finding some other arrangement that's negotiable. But the current situation isn't sustainable. You know it, I know it, and everyone who cares about Park's Kitchen knows it. He was quiet again, processing the implications of what I was suggesting. This wasn't just about admitting business failure. It was about acknowledging that everything he'd believed about his own capabilities was wrong. What would a partnership look like? He asked finally. That depends on whether you're willing to learn from someone whose methods you've been calling outdated for 6 weeks, whether you can set aside your MBA theories and understand that running a family restaurant is about more than profit margins and efficiency metrics. For the first time since our conversation began, I saw something that might have been hope flicker across his face, not the arrogant confidence he'd displayed during the ownership transfer, but genuine hope that maybe, just maybe, he could find a way to climb out of the hole he'd dug. I'm willing to listen, he said, but I need to understand if we do this, if we work together, what guarantee do I have that you won't just take over again? That this won't become your restaurant with me as some kind of junior partner? It was a fair question, and it deserved an honest answer. David, I'm 54 years old. I don't want to work 18-hour days anymore. I don't want to be responsible for every detail of daily operations. But I also won't stand by and watch 30 years of work get destroyed by inexperience and stubbornness. If we're going to save this place, we need to find a way to blend your ambition with my knowledge, your energy with my wisdom, and if I can't change, if I can't adapt to your way of doing things, I gestured toward the financial documents spread across the table. Then in 3 months, there won't be a restaurant left to argue about. The choice is simple. David, evolve or watch everything disappear. The new partnership agreement sat between us on the restaurant table like a peace treaty after a devastating war. David's lawyer had drafted it according to the terms we'd negotiated over 3 days of difficult conversations, each clause representing a compromise between his need for ownership and my need for control over what I'd created. Shared operational authority, David read aloud, his voice careful and measured. Mrs. Janelle Park will serve as executive chef and cultural director with final authority over all menu decisions, recipe development, supplier relationships, and staff hiring for kitchen positions. Mr. David Park will serve as general manager and business director with authority over marketing, financial planning, and front-of-house operations. It wasn't perfect, no compromise ever is, but it represented something. David had been forced to accept that his business education couldn't replace my 3 decades of restaurant expertise. The terms essentially gave me veto power over any changes that would affect the restaurant's cultural authenticity or food quality, while allowing him to manage the business side of operations and the financial arrangements. I asked, though I'd already reviewed this section multiple times, "You'll receive 30% ownership stake, restored immediately upon signing, plus full back pay for the 6 weeks of termination, calculated at your previous salary level, and. He paused, clearly uncomfortable with this next part. A formal apology to be posted publicly, acknowledging that your dismissal was an error in judgment." The public apology had been non-negotiable for me. David's termination hadn't just damaged me professionally. It had humiliated me in front of a community that had watched me build the restaurant from nothing. If we were going to work together, the community needed to see that he understood the magnitude of his mistake. "What about the staff?" I asked. "Mrs. Kim gets her full-time position back with restored benefits. Maria will be promoted to assistant manager with a salary increase. David sighed. "James found a better job, but we'll offer him consultant fees to help train new kitchen staff in your techniques. And the changes you made to the restaurant itself. The shrine goes back up. The Korean music returns. We'll gradually restore the traditional decor as budget allows. The menu reverts to the Korean names with English descriptions, and we go back to your portion sizes and pricing structure." Each concession was a small victory, but I could see what it cost David to enumerate them. This wasn't just about business terms, it was about admitting that everything he'd tried to improve had actually made things worse. "David, I need to know you understand why these changes are necessary. This isn't about me being stubborn or resistant to progress, it's about understanding what makes Park's Kitchen special." He nodded slowly. "I think I'm beginning to understand. When I removed the shrine, I thought I was making the restaurant more accessible to non-Korean customers. But what I actually did was remove something that honored our heritage and made Korean customers feel at home. When I changed the music, I thought I was creating a more universally appealing atmosphere, but I was actually erasing part of what made us authentic. And the recipes were the worst mistake." He looked down at his hands, shame evident in his posture. "I thought I could improve them by making them more consistent, more cost-effective. But I was trying to optimize something that was already perfect for its purpose. Your bulgogi marinade isn't just seasoning, it's a connection to Korean tradition. Your kimchi isn't just a side dish, it's culture on a plate." It was the first time since taking over the restaurant that David had spoken about food in terms of meaning rather than metrics. Maybe there was hope for him after all. The signing took place the following evening, witnessed by Mrs. Kim and Maria, who had been asked to return for the ceremony. Word had spread through the community that changes were coming, and I noticed more customers than usual during the dinner service, as if people were curious to see what would happen next. "Before we sign this," David said, his voice carrying a formality that reminded me of the ownership transfer ceremony 6 weeks earlier, "I want to say something publicly." He'd prepared a statement, which he read to the small gathering of staff and customers who'd stayed after closing time. 6 weeks ago, I made a serious error in judgment. I dismissed my mother, Mrs. Janelle Park, from the restaurant she built from nothing, believing that business education could replace 30 years of experience and cultural knowledge. I was wrong. Not just wrong about business strategy, but wrong about what makes Park's Kitchen special. Wrong about what our community values, and wrong about the irreplaceable contribution my mother has made to this neighborhood. His voice wavered slightly as he continued. "Mrs. Park didn't just build a successful restaurant, she created a gathering place, a cultural bridge, a second home for hundreds of families. In trying to optimize what she created, I nearly destroyed it. I'm asking for the opportunity to learn from her, to honor what she's built, and to earn back the trust of the community that has supported our family for 3 decades. The applause that followed was subdued but genuine. Mrs. Kim wiped tears from her eyes. Maria smiled for the first time since I'd been terminated. Even some of the customers who'd stayed looked hopeful, as if maybe their beloved neighborhood restaurant could be saved after all. We signed the papers with much less fanfare than the original ownership transfer. No lawyer present, no formal ceremony, just a mother and son trying to rebuild what had been broken. As David handed me the pen to sign my name, I caught his eye. "This is your chance to learn what business school couldn't teach you," I said quietly. "That success isn't just about profit margins, it's about serving something larger than yourself." "I know, Mom, I know." The next morning, I arrived at Park's kitchen at 5 a.m. for the first time in 6 weeks. The key work David had given me a new set the night before, and I walked into the kitchen that had been my second home for 30 years. Everything felt different. The new equipment was too shiny, too corporate. The layout had been changed to improve efficiency. Even the smell was wrong, chemical cleaners instead of the familiar mixture of garlic, sesame oil, and gochujang that used to permeate everything. But as I tied on my apron and began the morning prep routine I'd performed thousands of times, I felt something I hadn't experienced since the termination: purpose. This was my kitchen again, my restaurant, my life's work. And for the first time since David had fired me, I allowed myself to believe that maybe we could save what we'd almost lost. The real work would begin today. Not just the work of cooking and serving, but the harder work of rebuilding trust, restoring reputation, and teaching my son that the best business lessons can't be found in any textbook. The restored family photos went back up on the walls during our first week working together. Each frame, a small victory in reclaiming Park's kitchen's soul. David helped me hang them, his movements careful and respectful, as if he finally understood that these weren't just decorations but sacred markers of our family's journey. "Tell me about this one," he said, holding up a photo of Jin and me in front of our original food truck, both of us looking impossibly young and hopeful. "That was taken our second week in business. We'd made enough money to buy groceries and pay rent, and your father was convinced we were going to be millionaires." I smiled at the memory. He was so proud of that truck, even though the engine barely ran and the paint was peeling. "I barely remembered the truck," David admitted. "I remember being in it, but not much else. You were too young, but that truck taught us everything we needed to know about serving this community. We learned that authenticity matters more than perfection, that consistency builds trust, and that treating customers like family creates loyalty no business plan can replicate." As we worked together in the kitchen that morning, I began teaching David the secrets that couldn't be found in any cookbook: how to test the temperature of oil with a wooden chopstick, how to know when kimchi has fermented to the perfect point by its smell and texture, how to adjust seasoning not just for taste but for the weather, the season, the particular batch of vegetables we'd received that day. "Cooking is a conversation," I explained, watching him attempt to replicate my bulgogi marinade. "You're talking to the ingredients, listening to what they need, responding to how they change throughout the cooking process. Your business school taught you to eliminate variables, but cooking is all about embracing variables and adapting to them." The changes were immediate and dramatic. Within 3 days of my return, we'd restored the traditional Korean music that had been missing from the dining room. The shrine went back up in its corner, small but significant, honoring the ancestors who'd guided our family's journey. The menu returned to its familiar format, Korean names proudly displayed alongside English descriptions, but the most important restoration was in the kitchen itself. I brought back the suppliers David had alienated, apologizing for the confusion of the past weeks. Mr. Kim from Seoul Market was so relieved to hear from me that he offered to deliver our first order personally, just to make sure everything was exactly as we needed it. "Mrs. Park, it is so good to have you back," he said, unloading boxes of fresh Napa cabbage and Korean pears. "Your son, he is learning, he's trying," I said, watching David observe our interaction with genuine interest instead of impatience. "It will take time, but I think he's beginning to understand." The proof came in small moments throughout the day. When Mrs. Chen arrived for her first visit since the termination, David personally escorted her to her favorite table and made sure she received exactly what she'd been ordering for 20 years. When the construction crew came for lunch, he didn't time their meal or rush them through their food. Instead, he listened to their stories and learned their names. "They're not just customers," I explained during a quiet moment between rushes. "They're neighbors, community members, people who've supported us through good times and bad. When you treat them like transactions, you lose the foundation of everything we've built." Kitchen staff responded to my return with visible relief and renewed energy. Mrs. Kim, back to her full-time position, worked with a happiness I hadn't seen since before David's takeover. Maria, now officially assistant manager, took pride in training new servers according to our traditional standards of hospitality. "It feels like home again," Maria said, watching me prepare a batch of kimchi jjigae, using the properly fermented kimchi that had been missing for 6 weeks. "The smells are right, the rhythm is right, even the customers look more relaxed." She was right about the customers. Within a week, I could see the difference in the dining room. People were lingering over their meals again, having conversations, bringing friends and family. The tense, hurried atmosphere of David's efficiency-focused management had been replaced by the warm, welcoming environment that had always been our trademark. The online reviews began changing too. "Park's Kitchen is back," wrote one longtime customer. "Whatever happened during that strange period in April is over. Mrs. Park is in the kitchen again. The food tastes authentic again, and the service has returned to the family-style hospitality we've always loved." David read the reviews obsessively, tracking our rating as it climbed back toward our historical 5-star average. But more importantly, he was learning to read the stories behind the numbers, understanding that each positive review represented a relationship restored, a trust rebuilt, a community member welcomed home. "I never realized how much damage I was doing," he confided one evening as we cleaned up after service. "I thought customer complaints were just resistance to change, that people would adapt to improvements eventually. I didn't understand that what I called improvements were actually destructive." The financial recovery was equally dramatic. Within 2 weeks, our revenue had returned to pre-takeover levels. The customers who'd stopped coming during David's management began returning, and word of mouth brought new faces to try the restored Park's Kitchen. More importantly, our food costs stabilized as I resumed relationships with trusted suppliers and eliminated the waste that came from David's inexperienced ordering. "Mom, I need to ask you something," David said one afternoon as we prepared for the dinner rush. "How did you know exactly what quantities to order, what prices to pay, which suppliers to trust? Was it all just experience, or is there some system I missed?" "It was relationships, David. 30 years of talking to Mr. Kim about seasonal variations in vegetable quality. 15 years of learning Mrs. Yoon's family story and understanding why her fish is always the freshest. 20 years of working with Mr. Choi to understand the subtle differences between brands of gochujang. You can't systematize human connection, you can only build it, day by day, conversation by conversation." As the weeks passed, I watched David transform from a corporate manager trying to optimize a business into something closer to a true restaurant operator. He stopped timing bathroom breaks and started asking staff about their families. He stopped pushing cost reductions and started understanding why quality ingredients were worth their price. He stopped viewing customers as revenue sources and started seeing them as people deserving care and respect. The most meaningful moment came when Mrs. Chen brought her great-grandson to the restaurant for the first time. The little boy, maybe 5 years old, was shy and overwhelmed by the unfamiliar environment. Instead of treating them as just another table to turn over quickly, David knelt down to the child's level and offered him a small sample of our mildest dishes. "What's your favorite food?" David asked gently. "Chicken nuggets," the boy whispered. "Well, we don't have chicken nuggets, but we have something even better, Korean chicken that's crispy and sweet. Would you like to try a tiny piece?" I watched from the kitchen as David patiently introduced the child to Korean flavors, explaining each dish with the same care I'd once shown David when he was young. Mrs. Chen smiled broadly, nodding approvingly, as her great-grandson cautiously tasted bulgogi and pronounced it pretty good. "He's learning," Mrs. Chen told me as they prepared to leave. "Your son, he has good heart. Just needed to remember how to use it." That evening, as we closed the restaurant together, David and I fell into the comfortable rhythm that had been missing for so many weeks. He handled the front-of-house closing procedures, while I finished the kitchen prep for tomorrow. The tasks were familiar, efficient, but also meditatively satisfying routine of a day's work completed. "Mom," David said as we turned off the lights, "I want you to know that I understand now why you were so upset about the changes I made. I wasn't just changing business practices, I was erasing pieces of our family's story. And now I want to learn the rest of the story. Not just the recipes and the supplier relationships, but the history, the meaning behind the traditions, the reasons why certain things matter to our community." As we locked up and walked to our cars, I felt something I hadn't experienced since Jin died: hope for the future. Not just hope that the restaurant would survive, but hope that it would continue to serve its true purpose, feeding not just bodies but souls, preserving not just Korean flavors but Korean culture, creating not just profit but community. David had learned the most important lesson any business education could offer, that success isn't measured only in dollars and efficiency. but in the depth of relationships and the authenticity of service. And for the first time since he'd fired me, I believed he was ready to be trusted with the legacy Jin and I had built. The blended menu we created together represented more than just food. It was a bridge between tradition and innovation. Between my mother's recipes and David's generation's tastes, we spent hours in the kitchen after closing, experimenting with dishes that honored our heritage while appealing to younger customers who'd grown up with Korean fusion cuisine. What about Korean BBQ tacos? David suggested one evening, his voice tentative. Just months earlier, he'd pushed fusion concepts as pure business strategy. Now he approached them with genuine curiosity about how traditional flavors could find new expressions. Tell me what you're thinking, I said, not dismissing the idea immediately. Well, we could use your bulgogi recipe, the real one, with proper marinade, but serve it in handmade tortillas with kimchi and a gochujang aioli. It's fusion, but built on authentic foundations instead of shortcuts. I considered this carefully. The suggestion showed real understanding. He wasn't trying to replace traditional dishes, but to create new ones that could introduce Korean flavors to unfamiliar palates. Show me, I said. Thought we worked side by side, David preparing tortillas while I marinated beef according to the recipe he'd struggled so hard to replicate during his solo management weeks. As we cooked, I found myself explaining not just techniques but philosophy. Korean cuisine is about balance, I said, watching him carefully adjust the heat under the bulgogi. Sweet and spicy, fermented and fresh, soft and crispy. When you create fusion dishes, you need to preserve those balances even in new forms. The tacos we created were revelatory, recognizably Korean in flavor, but approachable for customers who might be intimidated by a traditional Korean menu. More importantly, they were delicious, meeting the standard that mattered most to me. I would be proud to serve them to Mrs. Chen alongside her usual kimchi jjigae. This is how innovation should work, I explained as we tasted our creation. Building on tradition, not replacing it. Adding to our story, not erasing it. David nodded, understanding dawning in his expression. Like the music system, you suggested keeping the traditional Korean songs, but adding a few modern K-pop tracks during lunch to attract younger customers. Exactly. Evolution instead of revolution. Our collaboration deepened over the following weeks. David's business education, when applied thoughtfully rather than aggressively, actually did offer valuable insights. He streamlined our ordering system without changing our suppliers, improved our scheduling without reducing our commitment to customer service, and developed a social media presence that celebrated our authenticity rather than hiding it. Look at this, he said one morning, showing me Instagram posts featuring photos of our traditional dishes alongside their Korean names and brief stories about their cultural significance. We're getting shares from Korean American families who say we're helping their kids connect with their heritage. The posts were beautiful professional photography that captured the soul of our food, not just its appearance. Each image told a story. The steam rising from kimchi jjigae, the perfect char marks on bulgogi, the careful arrangement of banchan that turned every meal into a small celebration. Your generation understands visual storytelling in ways mine never learned, I admitted. This helps people understand that we're not just a restaurant, we're cultural ambassadors. Our improved partnership was evident in every aspect of the restaurant's operation. David handled customer complaints with the patience and empathy I'd tried to teach him. Understanding that behind every criticism was a relationship worth preserving. When Mrs. Patterson from the flower shop mentioned that the lunch portions seemed smaller than she remembered, David immediately had the kitchen prepare a proper serving and personally delivered it to her table. Mrs. Patterson has been supporting us since our second week in business, he explained to the server who'd questioned the special treatment. She's not just a customer, she's family. We take care of family. The financial results of our collaboration exceeded even my optimistic projections. Revenue was up 20% from our historical averages, driven not by higher prices or cost-cutting, but by increased customer satisfaction and word-of-mouth marketing. Our online rating had climbed to 4.8 stars, with reviews that praised both our authentic traditional dishes and our innovative fusion offerings. But the most meaningful measure of our success was in the small daily interactions that made Park's Kitchen feel like a community gathering place again. David learned the names of regular customers and their usual orders. He remembered personal details: Kim's granddaughter's graduation, Mr. Hassan's promotion at work, Sarah's recent engagement and made each person feel seen and valued. You know what I realized? David said one evening, as we prepared for a busy Friday night service. Business school taught me that customer loyalty comes from competitive pricing and efficient service, but real loyalty comes from caring about people as individuals, not just revenue sources. And what does that mean for how we run the restaurant? It means success isn't just about maximizing profits. It's about serving something larger than ourselves. When Mrs. Chen brings her great-grandson here, she's not just buying dinner. She's sharing her culture with the next generation, and we're helping preserve that connection. I watched my son move through the dining room during service, greeting customers with genuine warmth, checking on tables not to hurry them along but to ensure their experience was perfect. This was the David I'd always hoped would take over the restaurant, knowledgeable about business, but grounded in humanity. Ambitious for growth but respectful of tradition. Mom, he said during a quiet moment between the dinner and late-night crowds, I need to ask you something important. Are you happy with this arrangement? Working together, sharing responsibilities. The question surprised me with its directness. Why do you ask? Because I know I put you in an impossible situation. You built this place from nothing, and I forced you out, then basically begged you to save me from my own mistakes. I want to make sure this partnership is what you actually want, not just what you felt obligated to accept. I considered his question carefully. 6 months ago, I'd envisioned retirement, travel, time to visit my aging mother in Korea. The termination had derailed those plans, but our reconciliation had opened possibilities I hadn't considered. David, I'm 54 years old. I could retire tomorrow and be financially comfortable, but this restaurant isn't just my livelihood, it's my legacy, my contribution to this community, my way of honoring your father's memory and my mother's traditions, working with you, teaching you, watching you grow into someone who truly understands what we've built. That's not an obligation, that's a privilege. His relief was visible, and for a moment I saw not the successful businessman or the struggling restaurant owner, but simply my son, still needing reassurance that he was worthy of the trust I'd placed in him. I won't let you down again, Mom, I promise. You already haven't, David. You've learned the most important lesson any business can teach, that success means serving something greater than yourself. Everything else is just details. The updated will sits in my safe now, next to the original restaurant lease and the photos from our food truck days. The document ensures that Park's Kitchen will remain in our family for generations. But more importantly, it codifies the principles David and I have learned to value together: authenticity, community service, and respect for the traditions that make us unique. 1 year after our reconciliation, Park's Kitchen was thriving in ways I'd never imagined possible. The restaurant had won Best Korean Restaurant from the city's dining guide, been featured in a national food magazine, and earned a steady stream of customers who came not just for the food but for the experience of being welcomed into our extended family. Look at this, David said, showing me the latest review from a prominent food critic. She says, we've achieved something rare: a restaurant that honors tradition while embracing innovation, that serves authentic cuisine without alienating newcomers, that operates as a business while functioning as a community center. The review was gratifying, but the real measure of our success was visible every day in the faces of our customers and staff. Mrs. Chen had started bringing her great-grandson twice a week, and the boy now proudly ordered kimchi jjigae in halting Korean phrases David had taught him. The construction crew still came for lunch, but now they brought their families for dinner too, introducing wives and children to Korean flavors with the confidence of regulars who knew they'd be treated well. Our staff had stabilized and grown stronger. Mrs. Kim, now officially our cultural consultant as well as lead server, took pride in training new employees about Korean customs and the stories behind our dishes. Maria had been promoted to general manager, overseeing daily operations with the perfect balance of efficiency and warmth. We'd hired 2 new cooks, young Korean Americans who wanted to learn traditional techniques alongside modern kitchen management. The most beautiful thing, Mrs. Kim told me one afternoon, is watching young Korean customers bring their non-Korean friends here. They feel proud to share their culture instead of embarrassed by it. That never happened when I was growing up. She was right. Park's Kitchen had become a bridge between communities, a place where Korean families could share their heritage and non-Korean neighbors could experience authentic flavors in a welcoming environment. David's fusion innovations had attracted younger customers without alienating our traditional clientele. creating a diverse dining room that reflected the changing demographics of our neighborhood. The business metrics were impressive too. Revenue had increased 40% from our pre-crisis levels, driven by higher customer volume rather than price increases. Our profit margins were the healthiest they'd ever been, achieved through David's improved systems and my focus on quality ingredients. Most importantly, we'd eliminated the debt David had accumulated during his solo management period, restoring the restaurant's financial stability. But perhaps the most significant achievement was less measurable: the restoration of Park's Kitchen's role as a community anchor. We hosted fundraisers for local schools, provided free meals for elderly neighbors during the holidays, and offered our private dining room for milestone celebrations. The restaurant had become what Jen and I had always dreamed it could be, not just a business, but an institution that strengthened the social fabric of our neighborhood. "I've been thinking about expansion," David said one evening, as we reviewed the year's financial reports. "Not franchising or corporate growth, but maybe a second location in the new development across town. We could bring authentic Korean food to families who can't easily get here." The suggestion would have terrified me. A year ago, expansion meant risk, complexity, potential dilution of what made us special. But David's approach was thoughtful, grounded in community service rather than pure profit motive. "Tell me more about your vision," I said. "A smaller place, maybe 25 seats, focused on takeout and casual dining. We'd use the same suppliers, the same recipes, the same hospitality standards, but we'd also adapt to the neighborhood, maybe offer Korean cooking classes, partner with the local community center, create a space where busy families can access quality Korean food without the full restaurant experience." It was a mature vision that balanced growth with authenticity, opportunity with responsibility. Who would run it? "I was hoping you'd consider training Maria to be head chef. She knows your techniques, she understands our values, and she's ready for more responsibility. I could oversee both locations until we're confident the second one is stable." The idea of mentoring Maria into a leadership role excited me more than the expansion itself. She'd grown from a young server into a skilled manager who embodied everything we valued about hospitality and cultural preservation. Teaching her to run her own kitchen would be another way of ensuring our traditions continued beyond my own involvement. "What about you?" I asked. "What's your long-term vision for your role in the business?" David was quiet for a moment, considering. "I want to be the bridge between your generation and mine, between traditional methods and modern opportunities. I want to help other Korean families preserve their food traditions while building sustainable businesses. Maybe that means consulting. Maybe it means a cookbook. Maybe it means something we haven't thought of yet." His answer revealed how much he'd grown from someone who saw the restaurant as a stepping stone to greater success, to someone who understood it as a platform for cultural preservation and community service. "There's something I want to show you," I said, retrieving a folder from my office. Inside were architectural drawings for a small expansion of our current location, a demonstration kitchen where we could offer cooking classes, private dining, experiences, and cultural events. "I've been working on this for months," I explained. "A way to share not just our food but our knowledge. Cooking classes for Korean Americans who want to connect with their heritage, cultural exchanges with other immigrant communities, maybe even video content that could reach families across the country." David studied the plans with growing excitement. "This is brilliant, Mom. It's growth that strengthens rather than dilutes what we've built. It's using our success to serve a larger purpose." As we discussed the possibilities, cooking classes taught in both Korean and English, partnerships with cultural organizations, online content that could preserve traditional techniques for future generations, I felt the same excitement I'd experienced 30 years earlier when Jin and I first dreamed of opening a real restaurant. But this time was different. This time, I wasn't building something from nothing. I was expanding something already strong and stable, and I wasn't doing it alone. I was working with a partner who understood both the business opportunities and the cultural responsibilities of what we were creating. "You know what this means, don't you?" David said, reviewing the expansion plans one more time. "What?" "It means Park's Kitchen isn't just our family's legacy anymore. It's becoming something that could outlast both of us, something that serves the community for generations to come." He was right. We'd moved beyond simply running a successful restaurant to creating an institution that preserved culture, built community, and passed knowledge to the next generation. That's the kind of legacy worth fighting for. The new recipe book sits on the shelf in our demonstration kitchen. Its pages filled with not just ingredients and measurements, but stories and wisdom accumulated over 3 generations. David and I wrote it together, my traditional techniques translated into clear instructions, his modern insights helping preserve ancient knowledge for contemporary cooks. Recipe for perfect kimchi jjigae reads: 1 entry, service 4 minutos, or enough to heal a broken heart. Begin with properly fermented kimchi, aged at least 3 weeks, until it develops the sour complexity that comes only with patience, like forgiveness. This dish cannot be rushed. Each recipe includes not just cooking instructions but cultural context, why certain ingredients matter, how techniques developed over centuries, what the dish means to Korean families gathering around shared tables. David insisted on including QR codes that link to video demonstrations, bridging the gap between written tradition and visual learning. This isn't just a cookbook, he explained to the food magazine photographer documenting our story. It's a cultural preservation project. We're trying to ensure that these techniques and traditions don't get lost when immigrant families become too busy to teach their children, or when authenticity gets sacrificed for convenience. The photographer captured us working together in the kitchen, David carefully measuring gochujang, while I adjusted seasoning by taste and intuition. The images would accompany an article about second-generation Korean Americans finding their way back to traditional cuisine after initial rejection of their heritage. For many years, I was embarrassed by Korean food, David admitted to the reporter. It smelled different from what my American friends ate. It required techniques I didn't understand. It represented everything that made me feel like an outsider. Now, I understand that these differences weren't barriers to overcome, they were gifts to preserve and share. The conversation reminded me of something Mrs. Chen had said the previous week. Watching her great-grandson confidently order bal in his improving Korean, children always come home to their grandmother's flavors, eventually. Sometimes it just takes longer than we hope. Park's kitchen had become that grandmother's kitchen for dozens of families, a place where traditional flavors were preserved, where cultural connections were strengthened, where the recipes that defined identity were passed from one generation to the next. Our cooking classes filled up weeks in advance, drawing Korean Americans eager to learn dishes their grandmothers had never written down, as well as curious neighbors wanting to understand the cuisine they'd been enjoying for years. The justice in all this, I reflected to David as we prepared for another busy evening service, isn't that you were punished for firing me. The justice is that we both learned what really matters, that success means serving something greater than ourselves, that tradition and innovation can coexist, that family businesses should strengthen families rather than divide them. David nodded, tying his apron with the practiced efficiency he'd developed over months of working beside me. I used to think justice meant getting what you deserve. Now, I think it means everyone getting what they need. Customers getting authentic food and genuine hospitality, staff getting respect and fair treatment, community getting a gathering place that honors their heritage. The evening rush that followed was typical of our new normal, busy, but not frantic, efficient, but not impersonal. David moved through the dining room with natural grace, greeting regulars by name, explaining dishes to newcomers, ensuring that every customer felt welcomed rather than processed. In the kitchen, I worked alongside our expanded staff, teaching techniques while maintaining the quality standards that had made us successful. Mrs. Chen arrived for her usual Tuesday dinner, now accompanied not just by her great-grandson but by 2 of his school friends who'd become curious about Korean food. I watched through the service window as David knelt beside their table, patiently explaining each dish and sharing stories about Korean holidays and traditions. That's how culture survives, Mrs. Kim observed, following my gaze, not through preservation in museums, but through sharing with open hearts. As the evening wound down and we began our closing routines, I felt the deep satisfaction that comes from work well done. The restaurant was thriving, the staff was happy, the customers were fed and satisfied. But beyond the immediate success, something larger was happening. We were contributing to the preservation and evolution of Korean American identity. One meal at a time. Mom, David said as we turned off the lights and prepared to lock up, I need to tell you something I should have said months ago. When I fired you, I wasn't just making a business mistake, I was betraying everything you taught me about loyalty, respect, and family. I'm sorry for the pain I caused, but I'm grateful for the lessons I learned. David, The pain was necessary to get us to this point. Sometimes we have to break before we can heal stronger than before. Like kimchi jjigae with well-fermented kimchi. I laughed at his comparison. Exactly like that. The best flavors come from time, patience, and the willingness to let things transform into something better than what they started as. As we walked to our cars under the soft glow of the Park's Kitchen sign, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this moment. A year ago, I'd been a discarded employee, humiliated and heartbroken, watching my life's work being destroyed by someone I'd trusted completely. Tonight, I was a partner in something stronger and more sustainable than anything I'd built alone. The recipe for justice, I'd learned, wasn't about revenge or retribution. It was about redemption, giving people the opportunity to learn from their mistakes, to grow beyond their limitations, to become the best versions of themselves. David had earned his second chance not through apologies but through actions, not through promises but through the daily practice of treating others with dignity and respect. Park's Kitchen would continue long after both of us were gone, sustained, not by ownership documents or business plans but by the relationships we'd built, the traditions we'd preserved, and the community we'd served. That's the kind of legacy that feeds not just bodies but souls, that nourishes not just individuals but entire neighborhoods, and that's the most satisfying recipe of all. The one that turns betrayal into understanding, failure into wisdom, and division into unity. Some ingredients can't be measured in cups or tablespoons. They can only be shared, one meal and one story at a time, until they become part of who we are and how we choose to serve others.